And without further ado, I think it's fair enough to say, introduce someone who I've known for a great number of years. Well, a few years. We were just recounting how many years, and then we were denying we've even known each other that long. So, ladies and gentlemen, can we have a really big welcome for Professor Graham Underwood, Professor of Marine and Freshwater Biology at the University of Essex.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Graham Underwood. I'm a professor at the University of Essex. I've been there 30 years working on this coast from a more ecological angle, thinking about how habitats and estuaries function. And I'm currently a NERC Knowledge Exchange Fellow. NERC is one of the research councils in the UK. I'm brought out to think about and work with partners, such as many of the people in this room, around what a resilient coast might look like for the year 2050. 2050 is a date that's come up quite a few times this morning. It's a good, I know it's 30 and a bit years away, but it's not very far away actually in ecological or geological time. And of course, it's the date of net zero. So 2050 is a sensible date to think about what things will be like in 35 years' time, and certainly how the coast will function in 35 years' time with all the pressures we have with climate change. So my talk's going to be in 5 short parts. I'm going to say a little bit at the beginning about the current status of our coastal seas, then go on to some ecological concepts that are really important as we think about the coast, ideas of the seascape and habitat connectivity. I'll then say a little bit about a role I've got within government looking at policy around blue carbon, which is relevant to how we might restore our coasts and protect our coasts, and then say something about the work we're doing, both at the University of Essex and elsewhere in East Anglia and other colleagues around looking at restoration, resilience, activities, and then summarise at the end. So there's 2 reports came out within the last few years. One was this state of the environment, coastal marine environment from the Environment Agency, came out in January this year. Really summarises where our coasts and shallow seas are over the last 20, 30 years. It's not a very cheery read, I have to say, and I'm not here to sort of talk about how terrible everything is. I think most people know that our environment is not in the best of health, and that's some of that is very long-term degradation, some of it's more recent. But in a sense, there's an opportunity then for us to do things differently to try and improve the health of our coastal seas and our landscapes and our seascapes, because we know some of the things we can do to actually make the world a better place. So that's an important report that really summarises the state of our current seas, of our seas currently. And then there's the report that was flagged by John Curtin in his talk this morning, the flood and coastal erosion risk strategy going forward, which again talks about the pressures we've got of climate change and sea level rise, and raises this issue of working with nature and with natural processes much more than has been the traditional approach of coastal engineers in the past. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity that opens up as we look forward. And it's partly opened up because money's scarce and we can think doing things with nature may well be cheaper. It's not necessarily. But doing things with nature also gives us other benefits, these natural capital, nature-based solutions, ecosystem services. And I'll touch on those a little bit in my talk. So I'm really trying to hopefully give you a message that there are things we can do. There's still gaps in our knowledge, but let's move forward thinking about how we can improve our coasts and our coastal seas and our estuaries from the rather unexciting baseline we currently have today. So you all know the context here. We're here in the east of England. It's called East Anglia, but it's also Essex, which I think technically isn't East Anglia. So anyway, it's the east of England, East Anglian Coastal Conference, the 3 counties who make up the RFCC in this part of the world. The middle picture there is from a Ben Evans paper. Ben's in the paper, actually. Ben's here in the audience. I just put that on to show our coastlines here in East Anglia. We have a low relief geology in East Anglia, made up of sand, sediment, shingles, clays, not much hard rock at all. But we do have a lot of coastal regions which are low in profile, vulnerable to sea level rise, inundated with long coastal plain estuaries, and significant amounts of salt marsh. So the green coloration on that middle plot is salt marsh. And actually in the east of England here, in our eastern region, 20% of the UK's salt marsh is in our part of the world. And I think many people here will know that salt marsh is a really important habitat in our coastal seascape that does a lot of useful things for us. The right-hand picture is just a projection of what will be below sea level by 2050 from one of these many websites you can find this information on. That's looking at a rather conservative sea level rise projection. And we heard this morning that actually, I was disappointed the professor from NOC wasn't here, because I think the current literature is that sea level rise is going to be much greater than the current official estimates of what sea level rise will be over the next 30 to 50 years. So that's something we really have to bear in mind. And Karen talked about that, the pressures that brings this morning as well. So I'm an ecologist, and I like to think about the big four we have here in East Anglia. I know if you go on safari, you can go and see the big four. And that's lions, leopards, rhinos, and Cape buffaloes. But we have a big four here in the east, and they're just as exciting. In fact, they're more wonderful, I think, than a lion. Once you've seen one lion, you've seen them all. But so we have four really rather fantastic sort of habitats here in the east that we don't actually sing the praises of enough, and we should really be really positive about them. So the first of these is salt marsh. And salt marsh is extensive still in some of our regions. Historically, over the last 2,000 years, we've lost very large amounts of our salt marsh, but we still have in some estuary systems quite significant areas of salt marsh. The map there is the Colne and the Blackwater, where the green is salt marsh on that map. And even in the last 30 to 50 years, we've still lost salt marsh, although perhaps in the last decade, because of some of the realignment work that's been done, the rate of decrease has possibly even turned. If you look at the areas in the latest EA report, suggests some uptick on the area of salt marsh we have here in East Anglia. But we still have a lot of salt marsh that's in poor ecological health, and like the picture here on the right-hand side, eroded clay, pillows and hummocks, not much vegetation, and marsh in a rather poor state. The other, number two of our big four, of my big four, are mudflats. And this is picture down here at the bottom. Here's the Orwell and the Stour, so between Essex and Suffolk. The brown is mudflats. Most of our estuaries have large areas of mudflatting. And I think of them very much as the Cinderella habitat, because they're often neglected. In the talk of all our coastal habitats, mudflats rarely get a billing. That's why I put them in my big four. But just like Cinderella, they do much of the work that is unappreciated in the ecology and the functioning of our coasts. So mudflats are really, really important. And we've lost mudflats more recently, particularly around the mouths of our estuaries. So you can see the map here is Harwich and Felixstowe, and the mud's missing there because it's all been reclaimed. And reclamation of mudflats was seen as really nothing much to worry about. But in terms of connectivity and spatial orientation of habitats and the functioning that mudflats do, then mudflat loss is something that we should be paying attention to. And sadly for me, who's worked all my life on mud, the small lozenge of mud at the bottom of Harwich there by Parkston, that's due to go soon as the Bathurst Bay industrial development there. So we'll lose yet another bit of mudflat. And it's not something that people really get too upset about, but they should. The third of our habitats of my big four is seagrass. And seagrass used to be really widely distributed all over the southeast of England and around the North Sea into the Dutch coast and things too. A lot of seagrass was lost in the 1930s due to a wasting disease. And since then, seagrass has been really badly affected by poor water quality and physical disturbance. But in the last few years, there's been a sort of resurgence of seagrass. It's very, very small, but seagrass is popping up again in sites where for many, many years it's been lost. And we have a PhD student at Essex, a person called Alice Malcolm Mackay. She's funded by Harwich Haven. She's been looking at seagrass in the Essex and Suffolk rivers, and we've got some patches of seagrass. The top map there is the Orwell, the bottom one is the Stour, and the middle one is the Stour, and the bottom is the Blackwater. And seagrass is reappearing at sites where for many, many years it's been absent. So that's a sign of hope that some of this really important habitat is on its way back. And the last one of these big four are oysters, native oysters. And again, native oysters were really majorly fished out in the Victorian period. And then the populations that were left were really badly hit by the 63-64 freezing cold winter that killed a lot of marine life and wiped out oysters. But the stronghold for native oysters is actually in the Essex estuaries, in the Colne and the Blackwater estuaries. And we did some work in about 10, 12 years ago now, mapping those remaining oyster populations. And that was part of the reason that that part of the world became a marine conservation zone for oysters. And it's worth noting that those oysters were in those habitats because of the husbandry of the local oyster fishermen in that part of the world who had maintained those oyster populations through their low-scale but profitable oyster farming. So people sometimes think fishing and conservation, or aquaculture and conservation, can't go hand in hand. Elsewhere in the UK, the oysters had gone, but still we have a stronghold of native oysters there in the southeast of our patch here in the Colne and Blackwater. So we have the big four, and we know about that, and we know quite a lot about their individual ecologies and how they work. But the concept I want to introduce to you today is this idea of seascapes. So obviously everyone's used to the word landscape. So seascape is just a portmanteau rearrangement of that to think about how habitats are arranged within a marine context. And the thing about seascapes is you can't always see them if they're underwater. So the habitats you don't necessarily have a very visual impact of. On the coast, it's a bit different because we have these coastal habitats like salt marsh and mudflats and sandflats that come out at low tide that we can see. But a seascape is a really important concept in ecological science that's developing. And it's around the physical mosaic of habitats and how they interact with each other. So we need to think not just about restoration and recovery at an individual site, but how they fit within a broader mosaic of the seascape. And the reason that's important is because of this other concept of connectivity. So connectivity is thinking about how things move through a landscape. And there's two elements. There's structural connectivity, which is sort of drawn on the diagram there, fish and other things moving from oyster beds to seagrass beds onto the mudflats into salt marsh and vice versa. But we also have functional connectivity, and that's how things happen over the lifetime of animals. So do they lay their eggs in one place and the young feed somewhere else? Does carbon or energy or nutrients move across that landscape in terms of energy and matter? Or is there gene flow? Are populations genetically isolated and can no longer breed with each other, and so they become genetic bottlenecks? So there's a whole set of concepts around connectivity and seascapes that are important when we think about restoring our coasts and building natural capital as we go forward for the next 30 years. And so there's two questions that are really posed here on the bottom of my slide. Are seascapes with greater connectivity more resistant and resilient to pressures, all the pressures that we know are happening on our coast? And do such connected systems provide greater ecosystem services? We know from work in other parts of the world, the answer to both those questions is probably yes. We don't actually have all the data we need here in the UK, and that's some work that I'm doing with colleagues at other universities and the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, looking at some of those sorts of things. So I want to bring in this concept of this term called blue carbon. Blue carbon's a word, it's one of the terms of the moment. You know how there's fashions in every discipline. Well, blue carbon is everywhere now. People throw it out as a term to cover a whole range of things that it's not really. But blue carbon is actually the idea that biological systems, particularly vegetated biological systems, so that in the UK is seagrass, salt marsh, and mangroves, because the UK has mangroves in our international waters, obviously not yet in England, but how those habitats draw carbon dioxide from their photosynthesis out of the air into their organic matter, and then it gets trapped in the sediments. So blue carbon is thought about in terms of net zero and in terms of climate change as a way of mitigating emissions of carbon dioxide. If we're putting carbon dioxide out here, if we can enhance our blue carbon sinks, then we can draw it down into the sediments. So the formal definition of blue carbon are the three habitats outlined there in green. That's what the International Panel on Climate Change recognises. But the concept is being looked at more broadly now across the UK to encompass things like mudflats, oyster and mussel beds, kelp beds, so seaweed, merle beds. Merle is a type of red coralline algae that lives subtidally. There's none of it in this part of the world, but it's really big in the southwest of England and in Ireland. And then subtidal sediments. And these are all locations that store carbon within them and prevents that carbon from going up into the atmosphere. And all those habitats, of which the big four are part, do these really interesting and important ecosystem service provisions. So I've talked a little bit about carbon. They stabilize sediments, really important. We've heard about sediments moving around on the coast today. Sediment stabilization by things like seagrass beds hold sediment in place, salt marsh holds sediment in place. That can promote coastal protection. Seagrass salt marsh can take tidal surge energy out through the vegetative structure above ground. And then all those habitats do really important things like recycle nutrients and give us clean water. That leads through to things like fisheries and reducing the risk of harmful algal blooms. And they also provide habitat for fish and nursery grounds. And then there's all the social benefits we heard about this morning, people liking clean and healthy ecosystems to visit, to do work in, to live by, to get the benefits from. So those services. So if you look at those habitats, how important are they in trapping carbon? What's their sort of blue carbon potential? And we did some work with colleagues at UEA and CFAS a few years ago, just to on the amount of stocks. And the graph on the left, basically the bigger the number, the more carbon is stored per square metre of those habitats. And the green bar there is salt marsh. So you see it's one of the biggest ones in terms of storing carbon, but it's also got one of the largest ranges of uncertainty. If you look across the studies that exist, then there's some very low numbers and some very high numbers and a whole range of numbers in between. So we need to bottom that out if we are going to progress this whole blue carbon agenda a little bit. The grey bar there are intertidal sediments. Here's our Cinderella mudflats and sandflats, also very important for storing carbon. And then some of the other habitats are shown on that figure. CFAS did a bit of calculation to say how much of that is in the UK. It's called the Secretary of State's waters. So it's a sort of rather clumsy term. It's the sort of inshore waters and the bits that the DEFRA are responsible for. But you can see offshore sediments hold a huge amount of carbon. And then the next big slice of the pie are intertidal sediments and then salt marshes. So nationally, this is a large store of carbon. So the more we can enhance that, the more carbon we'll trap. The more we lose those habitats and damage them, the more carbon will come out into the atmosphere and contribute to changes in climate. So that leads me on to this thing called the UK Blue Carbon Evidence Partnership. This was set up after the COP conference in Glasgow in 2021. And it's a committee that I took the chairship over in March this year that takes both policy civil servants and evidence civil servants from a number of departments across the UK. So we have members on it from DEFRA and from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and then representatives from the Northern Ireland, Welsh and Scottish devolved administrations. And the purpose of this committee is to coordinate policy development around everything to do with blue carbon and blue carbon habitats as we move forward. There are some interesting statutory obligations to reach net zero, to enhance biodiversity, that all the governments have signed up to. And so they're looking at how policy can be developed to actually enhance blue carbon habitats and get the benefits that we need into our coastal zones and into our seascapes as we go forward. So in June this year, we published this evidence needs statement, which is really a summary of all the questions that we need to answer to progress blue carbon policy in the UK context and get that harmonised and everyone working together and on the same page. Because as you can imagine, with devolved administrations, sometimes there's different timescales, they've got different legislation programmes, sometimes they're just in opposition to each other. But this is a way of drawing all of these things together in one place. It's really useful because it provides benefits of coordination. But it also is facing out to NGOs, agencies like the Environment Agency, to think about how they can coordinate all of their work to come together to fill these evidence gaps we need, that we've got. So there's 5 objectives to this evidence needs statements. These are 5 areas of active work within policy development and government to think about how we protect these really important coastal and near inshore habitats. The first of these is actually saying, should we include seagrass and salt marsh in the United Kingdom's greenhouse gas inventory? This is the number that we report to the United Nations every year as part of the Paris Accords to say, how are we doing on our journey to net zero? And there's a big question mark about whether salt marsh actually does enough to make it worth government's while to actually put it into the greenhouse gas inventory. Some of the conservation organisations are very, very keen that this is done. Others are a little bit more wary about it. But you've seen the error bars in some of those graphs. We need to do work around understanding what these numbers really are to see if that actually makes an appreciable difference. And it's a political decision in the end, because if they do that, that opens up a can of worms to which other habitats should or shouldn't be in that UK greenhouse gas inventory. There's a lot of work being done around enabling investment in blue finance and blue-green finance and marine finance. We've heard about the lack of money this morning, and there's real interest in marine natural capital and investing in that, but there's big question marks about is it reliable, what are the returns, what are the risks associated with capital investment coming in. So there's work taking place there. We need to know more about the impact of humans and our societal pressures on those habitats. Here's seascapes again, the fourth one. We need to manage at a seascape scale. Karen was saying this morning. Our piecemeal approach up to now has been completely understandable. As opportunities arose, people did things here, there, and everywhere. But if we need to get serious about this, need to get big, we need to start thinking at a seascape scale to maximize the benefits of working at scale, to actually make an appreciable change for the positive future that we want here. And all of these things can help us achieve climate mitigation and adaptation. So there's benefits to doing this. It's not just a nice to have. This is a really key thing to have if we're going to manage the coast in a sustainable way. Very quickly, there's a lot of detail in that report. You can find it on the CFAS website, but there's work in progress and questions around all these various issues. Standardizing methods seems really boring. It is a bit boring, but you've got to do it right so we know what we're doing. Habitat mapping, measuring stocks, looking at the impact of humans and the impact of climate change. There's a lot of uncertainty about how our ecosystems will function by 2050. Hotter, drier summers, stormier, higher sea levels. You might think it won't be business as usual. It won't be like it is today. And we have to understand how it will be in 2050 to understand what will be happening. So we shouldn't just assume that a salt marsh today will be like the salt marsh will be the same in 2050 for all those sorts of reasons. And then work around the socio-economic benefits and costs of all these things, which again come to some of the themes of this morning about how do we get society on board with this and how do we get the benefits to society captured in this sort of work. So there's a few things just ongoing I thought would be helpful for you just to know about. In fact, next week we've got a workshop in London with the members of UK BSEP, is the way we pronounce that long abbreviation, and two working groups, the UK Blue Carbon Forum, which is academics, NGOs, other agencies, and there's a Scottish version of that too. So we've got a workshop next week to coordinate the next pieces of work we need to do to make sure we're doing that. DEFRA has a working group to look at this issue about shall we put salt marsh into the greenhouse gas inventory. That might seem a bit, well, why does that matter? If it's in there, there'll be a whole load of policy drivers and money and resource that can come along to build new salt marsh if we think it's worth its while. So we had to do that work. That's being led by DEFRA. There was some mention of codes this morning. A salt marsh code is being developed by mainly UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, looking at things like carbon and nitrogen, and that'll be along the same sort of lines as the peatland code or the woodland code, which means owners of land can get credits and sell credits to do things like, for example, to create salt marsh, to capture carbon, to capture nitrogen. And there's been a lot of work engaging with finance houses and the finance industry around how finance capital might come into this sphere. And a big report came out just 2 weeks ago highlighting the next steps we need to do along those lines. In some other parts of the world, private finance is already coming into conservation and restoration activity. It's not so hot yet in the UK, but Aviva, there was just an announcement the other day that Aviva are working with World Wildlife Fund for Nature on big schemes and things like that. Big companies with deep pockets are interested in this if they have confidence that A, they're going to do something valuable, and B, they'll get a return out of that one way or another. So that leads me to the last part of my talk, really, which is thinking a little bit about, therefore, the challenges ahead of us and some of the gaps of knowledge we need to fill to meet some of these challenges for us as society on the coast. So this sort of overlapping Venn diagram here really just summarizes a whole set of questions around coastal change and the different disciplines and the different thought processes we need to think about as we address those. So the blue circle are the physical changes of geomorphology and hydrodynamics and modeling that will be impacted by sea level rise and climate change. There's a whole set of questions to us biologists around how communities and species and habitats will respond to those in terms of their diversity changes and their functioning. And then there's a whole set of questions in the circle at the bottom about how society is going to respond to those things, and how do we need to work with people, social scientists, arts and humanities people, to talk to the people, not just the people on the coast, but the people in the country in general, about how we can move this forward, understanding geography, anthropology, and all these other issues. And we've just started at Essex this month a new European programme called Rewrite. And it's got the longest title of any grant I've ever had, this one down here at the bottom, Rewilding and Restoration of Intertidal Sediment Ecosystems for Carbon Sequestration, Climate Adaptation and Biodiversity Support. It was the French lead who put that together. It's even longer in French, you can imagine. But anyway, this is this project that's just started. It's called Rewrite, and it's a really exciting opportunity to look at these issues of coastal restoration, coastal rewilding, coastal resilience at a European scale. So the Rewrite project has a number of, we're calling them demonstrator sites, scattered across Europe, from the Bay of Cadiz, right at the tip of Spain, up through Portugal, France, to the UK, where Essex, we've got the UK demonstrator, with a satellite on the Humber, colleague in Northern Ireland, Iris Mola, who many of you will know in the room, and then colleagues in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and up into the Danish fjords. And the advantage of looking at how these muddy estuarine habitats full of salt marsh, seagrass, mudflats and things function across this gradient is that that gradient is something we call a distance for time gradient. So as we go south, we're going to come into weather and climate zones that will be more like Britain will be in 20, 30 years' time. So we can look, we haven't got a time machine, but we can use distance as a sort of proxy for time. It's not perfect, but it allows us to think about how those systems are functioning now and bring that information to how we know our systems work today, because we can then use that to project forward into the future. We've also got some partner colleagues in North America who have got similar sorts of questions and issues to work with, both in the Californian side and in the top of Canada there. So the question really, and it's a bit, in a way, what we've been talking about this morning, what might if we want to rewild our coast for all the benefits that we could get for that, of ecosystem services, habitat stability, more fish, cleaner water, more coastal protection from nature-based solutions, what on earth might that look like? I mean, how can we even envisage that? So we plan to create some scenarios using modelling and things to look forward to 2050. If we just do nothing at all, if we just carry on as we're doing now, what will the coast look like in terms of sea level functioning? What might it look like if we do some rewilding? What might it look like if we do large amounts of rewilding? Different scenarios for different places to play around with that to see how it works. We've got some examples already of what's worked. We know there's some historical examples of managed realignment and things like that. We can learn from those. We have a colleague at Essex who does 3D virtual reconstructions of environments. So we can go out to the people and say, this is, put your headset on, this is what it might look like if we do this, this is what it, you can immerse yourself in these environments, move around, because we have to bring people on board with all this, as well as the science and the academic communities. And there's a really big question what rewilding a coast means. So there's some quite high-profile terrestrial rewilding exercises. And if you own a large amount of land and you can remove your tenant farmers or what have you, you can just allow the forest to grow, and that's fine. You can't do that in the coast. There's too many people in the coast and on the coast. People have legal rights to travel through the coast, rights for fishing, things like that. So rewilding a coast is a really interesting question. It comes to some of the things that were talked about this morning too. And I think that's really going to be a fascinating concept here, because some of the passionate conservation organisations are very passionate that the only way to rewild is to take people out of the equation and just let it do itself. But there's another school of thought who thinks we have to help the environment to rewild by active interventions, active restoration. And then I'm very pragmatic about this. People are part of this. We have to do this with people. We can't take people out of the coast and just think that nature will take its merry course if we do that. And the benefits of all this, if we can get this right, it links to things we heard about this morning. There's all co-benefits of having more carbon fixation, more carbon sequestration, flood defence, biodiversity, blue-green economy, better place to live, health and well-being. All of these things can flow from a much better, more exciting coastal environment. So here in east of England, we have a demonstrator site for this project. We've chosen the Colne Blackwater Estuary in Essex for a number of reasons. The middle map there shows all the sea walls on that part of the coast. So it's a classic bit of southeast England coastline, heavily defended, heavily engineered. A lot of that came up after 53, but a lot of it's been reclaimed over centuries before that. So we have a highly modified coast. It's quite fragmented from a habitat point of view, and we've lost things like seagrass and that sort of stuff in those environments. But we also have a lot of research data and a lot of general data on those habitats. We're not starting with a blank piece of paper. We know quite a lot about how those systems function, so we can model forward into different scenarios to see how they really will function as we go forward. From the agency's points of view, the Colne Blackwater is not meeting its ecological targets, it's not meeting its water quality targets, so there's work to be done there from a statutory point of view. And a really exciting thing is that it's also part of what's called the climate focus area in Essex. And that's an idea that came out of work sponsored by Essex County Council to have a climate commission a few years ago to say how could Essex as a county get to net zero by 2050. And one of the outcomes of that was to have a climate focus area, which is the catchments of the rivers Colne and Blackwater. So that's what the map is on the right-hand side. And that's a test bed for trialling all sorts of things. Things are being trialled on the land, in transport, in housing, in planning. It's not just natural stuff, all the stuff that society needs to do to get to net zero. But there's also work around natural capital and how the land and the sea interface. And so by having our project rewrite embedded within this wider concept of the climate focus area is a real positive, I think. So just a couple of slides really to, I think, hopefully lift our moods that actually there is a chance of getting things moving in the right direction here. One is, oh, it didn't go on. There we go. If we think about that part of Essex, there's an Environment Agency programme called Rememory, which is a national programme to try and restore 15% of habitats by 2043. In the River Blackwater, and to some extent now in the Colne, we've got a whole set of managed realignment trials and initiatives. Some of those were actively created, some were created just by seawalls breaking. So we have in that part of the world what's called a chrono sequence, a time sequence stretching back over 100 years. And UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology have published some really interesting stuff showing how, if you are going to try and recreate salt marsh by managed realignment, how long it takes to get back to the state of functioning that we'd like to see for it to trap carbon, provide fish habitat, do all the other ecosystem services that it does. And there's possible future managed realignment locations in that part of the world. Are they going to be in the right place? Where does this seascape issue, where does this connectivity issue come into that sort of consideration? We've done some work just recently with the Environment Agency looking at how you can repair sea walls and yet build in some green infrastructure. And this is a project where seawalls that are at risk of collapsing and falling into the sea, they were mended in a slightly different fashion with stone gabions, and we built terraces of salt marsh. And we've looked at how they've been working over the last 10 years. This paper's just about to come out. 14 out of 15 of those trials maintain their sea defence function. Only one fell into the sea. And on some of them, we got really good salt marsh, and some we got different sorts of biological systems. And there's learning from that about how you could scale that up. Imagine if we did that over all 350 miles of the coastline of Essex. You'd just create linear strips of habitat where there's no habitat already. There was some mention this morning about beneficial use of dredgings. There's quite a lot of pilots and use of beneficial use of dredgings. I think Andrew St. Joseph made the point, it's just really difficult to get a license to do anything with this sort of stuff. That's a slightly different issue. We have a governance work package in our rewrite programme, and I was just thinking this morning, we need to think hard about governance, about how much of this stuff is regulated, because we clearly need a simpler, more agile system to allow things to take place. But beneficial use of dredgings is another positive thing that we can do on our coastline. And then just two comments on other restoration that's going on. The map there is where the Environment Agency thought native oysters could be restored. And there's a whole estuary, there's a whole native oyster restoration project taking place in Essex. It's called Estuaries. It involves the oyster fishermen, the Zoological Society of London, various other people. And there's a restoration box there where that blue dot is on the map, where culture's been put down, shell has been put down, mother oysters are being laid to try and promote and enhance the native oysters in that part of the world, for all the benefits we could get if we had substantial oyster reefs. And seagrass restoration is also underway at St. Lawrence Bay on the south side of the Blackwater there, where some transplanting experiments are going to see, can we transplant seagrass into other parts to increase the size of those seagrass beds and get them all growing. Final slide. I put this in really just to challenge partly anyone from Natural England who's here. It's always a good fun thing to do. And because we have some new species on our coast that we have to learn to live with and probably think about how they function in a new way. One of these is Spartina anglica, the common cordgrass. The botanists have been at it. It's now got a new name. It's now called Sporolobus anglicus. But that's a species that evolved in Britain 100 years ago through hybridization with American species. It grows lower on the mudflats than normal salt marsh. There's been lots of thoughts about whether we should try to get rid of it or not. It's here to stay, and it seems to do very well in warm climates. It's probably a plant that will do really well as we move forward into a changed set of climates. So we need to think about how our coastal systems will look with even more Spartina in them. And the other one is the rock oyster, Chrysostria edulis, the Pacific rock oyster. When I first came to Essex, the water temperatures weren't warm enough in the summer for this species to reproduce. It now reproduces and is spreading all over the North Sea basin. It lives intertidally. It's a big monster. Many people don't like it. It's an invasive species, but we cannot get rid of it. So can we use that to stabilize coastlines, to build oyster reefs and things like this? So we have to think a little bit out of the box and think forward. We're not going to restore the coast to how it was in pre-Victorian times. We need to build a resilient coast for the 21st century and not the 19th century. So I'll finish there, really. Multiple pressures are on our coasts that we heard about this morning. There's lots of statutory drivers and international obligations we've made around net zero, biodiversity enhancement. There's all the pressures on our coasts and our communities. And we've got international obligations under UN sustainability goals and those sorts of things too. And there's lots of benefits to doing this in terms of climate mitigation and enhancing our local environment. So we've got lots of availables. I think we should learn by doing. We should make mistakes. We should just do stuff. We don't want to keep waiting and waiting for some perfect solution to be produced. It's never going to be. We should trial as many things as possible, learn from that. And I think a really important thing is to bring civic society into this conversation on board. And I think that's why a meeting like this is really so valuable and important. I want to thank the organisers for, again, bringing together such a really wide range of people, because it's all very well academics in universities having great ideas. I think that's a great thing, obviously. But if we need to be grounded in the realities of the real world too, and hear and learn from you about your challenges at the same time as us thinking about the new science and the new work we need to do. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for listening.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, that was a great presentation, as always. It's a pleasure to have Graham here. There's lots in that, absolutely lots. And actually, Graham has set us up nicely now for the next session, which is off into the workshop. So what I'm going to do now is just suggest you go to the workshop. So a couple of things. For the students' workshop, please remain in the atrium. Do not leave the atrium, stay here, please. We will be watching. No, I'm only teasing. Secondly, for the rest of you, please go to your workshops. On your badges, although I'm a bad example because I haven't got one written down, you should have a room number and the name of the workshop that you opted for when you either contacted or booked. If you have, go straight to those rooms. My colleagues will help you. They're waving their hands frantically at the back. If you have not got a workshop number or room, please go back to the main desk where you picked your ticket up, your check-in desk, have a word with the guys there, and they'll help you find a workshop they're all great, so it's a really good choice. So if you can go now, and then obviously that runs through till 2:50ish, but we will come around the rooms and remind people of time. So go away and take those thoughts and conversations to your workshops. Thank you.
is for, to lead me to your door. Know that while you sleep, everything has changed. You make the moon unmirable, the streets an empty stage, the city's silence violins. Everything has changed. Everything has changed. Everything has changed. So lift off low. Lift off low, lift off low, lift off low, lift off low, lift off low. Lift off low, down to you, dear.
So Yeah, quiet. Right. So my name's James, and this is Michael. All right. And this is basically a workshop about climate change, and then we're going to look at digital tools that you use in school and the potential for augmented reality and virtual reality as a way of better educating young people, better engaging with young people, and then also helping young people engage with each other better, if that makes sense. So in this workshop, it's relatively short. We're just going to introduce who we are and what we do. We're going to discuss the impact of climate change on the coast and what that means for the future, introduce what's being done already and new concepts about dealing with coastal issues. So there's been a lot today about resilience and adaptation and things like that. And then, like I said, we're going to discuss the use of digital tools in helping us engage with young people and all that fun stuff. So that's me on the left. I work for Coastal Partnership East. We've helped organise this event. We're the coastal management authority for North Norfolk, Great Yarmouth and East Suffolk Council. So that's Holcombe in North Norfolk all the way around to Felixstowe. My job is an engagement officer, so that means sort of assisting with the communication side of things. So a lot of stuff with communities, I do a lot of the social media, I make videos and all that sort of stuff. I didn't do geography at school, and I've come to learn how, I don't want to sound corny, but how cool it can all be and how interesting it can all be. And a lot of what I've learned over the last 18 months of me being in this job, yeah, is a lot.
So, yeah, I'm Mike Copestake, pre-construction manager for Balfour Beatty. So at the moment I'm dealing with the whole of the East Anglian coastline, working closely with Coastal Partnerships East, East Suffolk Council, North Norfolk District and everybody in between. Basically we're a contractor and we install the solutions, and mainly it's hard engineered solutions at the moment, and we'll get into what we're doing currently and what we're looking at in the future, but we're also heavily involved in the Resilience Coast project that you may have heard about, which is the innovative solutions, soft engineering, and how Balfour Beatty can bring their expertise to that as well, because obviously our core business is historically hard engineered solutions, but we need to develop our business to really drive in this innovation, because we've got sort of the back-in and the experience to do that. Like James, I didn't do geography at school. And I think not only geography is cool, but it's also vital for the protection of these communities that we're trying to help. So yeah, I think it's vital in everything we do.
Fab. So we're jumping to activity one, and it's a bit of a two-parter. So I think there's about 15. I think I've just quickly counted. So if you split into 3 groups, 5 to a board, and on there, I just want you to think about what impacts of climate change concern you the most. So what not necessarily worries, but just what do you think are the biggest impacts? And we're going to think about worldwide. Then we're going to think about, okay, what about the UK? And then specifically the coast. All right, so if 5 of you go over there, 5 of you go over there, 5 of you go over there. Go. Yeah.
Chilling in the green room.
in my feelings, overthink the truth, fantasize you left me behind, and I'm turned back running for you. Make it up to me, you know it's better. Make it up to me, you know it's better. Be sweet to me, baby. I wanna believe in you. I wanna believe. Be sweet to me, baby. I wanna believe in you. I wanna believe in something. So come and get your woman. Pacify her rage. Take the time to undo your lies. Make it up once more, this feeling. Recognize your mistakes, and I let you back in. Realize not too late. Love you always. Make it up to me, you know it's better. Make it up to me, you know it's better. Be sweet to me, baby. I wanna believe in you. I wanna believe. Be sweet to me, baby. I wanna believe in you. I wanna believe in something. Be sweet to me, baby. I wanna believe in you. I wanna believe. Be sweet to me, baby. I wanna believe in you. I wanna believe in something. I was in your wet dream, driving in my car. Saw you at the side of the road. There's no one else around. You're touching yourself, touching yourself, touching yourself.
So there's a big hint on the screen as well about what happened, what could happen,
Your houses can crack.
those sorts of things. Okay. All right, another couple of minutes.
All of them apart from one group is on the impacts on the coast. So
Yeah. In fact, all right, final point, and then whoever's feeling confident, stay standing, and the rest of you sit down. All right? Who's feeling confident? You're pretty confident, so you stay standing. No. You stay standing, the rest of you sit down, all right? Okay. All right, if we take a seat then, apart from the one confident person that's going to stay at each board.
It looks like it's a food, by the way, because I can't spell. People loves hot. Yeah, nice.
Okay. We'll start here then. So thinking about worldwide impacts, what sort of thing did you come up with in your team?
We said forest fires,
Yeah, forest fires.
habitats,
Mm-hmm.
floods, flash floods to be specific,
Yeah.
hurricanes, tornadoes, heavy perception, food loss, farmland loss, which then links to droughts.
Yeah. Fab. They're all pretty good. Fab, what we got over here for worldwide and UK?
Like this rising sea level,
Mm-hmm.
low altitude ski resorts are going out of business.
It's a real issue.
Global warming, extinction of animals and destruction of their habitats, ice caps melting, not enough food and resources for an overpopulated planet, and there's more veganism.
Okay. Does that concern you, does it, veganism? Yeah. Okay, cool. Got it. What have we got over here for worldwide? And yeah,
Quite a large category,
it is, yeah.
like especially who have habitats like icebergs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then greenhouse gases and pollution as kind of a whole.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Okay, moving straight on then to the coast. So what have you got for the coast? Yeah.
So the sea levels rise, which lead to the coast eroding and then infrastructure being demolished, like the picture there.
Yeah. So yeah, that is obviously a huge concern. What have we got over here for the coast?
Sea levels rise, increase erosion, homes can fall into the sea, and then people can lose their houses, and we've got more destructive waves.
Yeah, fantastic. And then over here.
The sea levels rising, along the coastline is retreating, especially in Norfolk. And some of the land is like below sea level.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, brilliant. So you can sit down now. Well done. Thank you. So Mike's now going to go through what is actually happening on our coast here.
So yeah, I mean, you've probably, this map's been up about 5 times today on different presentations, I think. So I think you're probably all quite familiar with it as well. So I'm not sure where any of you are from. So if you just think about where you live on this map, or people you know, I don't know if you've got family and things that live in this coast, then just look at anyone that you might know that lives in these red areas. Because I think if you start looking at this, and this is predicted 2050, so it's not that far away. It really isn't. So I actually grew up Hemsby and that way, and a lot of these pictures were taken at Hemsby. So obviously it's been over the news, it's been on the press, that it's as people call it, a poster child for what's going on in this region. And unfortunately it definitely is. I was there in the last emergency when people's houses were being demolished, when people were literally losing everything. And one of the things I think people need to recognise in the community, it's not the fact that people are losing their houses. It's these people have lived next door to somebody for 15, 20 years. They pop round, they're in close-knit communities. And when their houses go, so does that community. So it means something. So it's not just the physical effects of what this does. It's actually, yeah, the knock-on effect to the communities and the people and how people live. It really is concerning.
Question, Mike.
So,
You've got a question on that?
oh, yep. So in the fens, it's low-level land, and it's artificially pumped. So we've basically, if you go back to a Roman map of the area, you'll see that a lot of it was underwater, especially out, and the same in that Great Yarmouth area, because there were islands. So Flegg was an island. There was East and West Flegg as an island. I only know that because I went to school there. But yeah, it's low-level areas that are artificially pumped, and it is basically reclaimed from historic sea areas. So that's why those areas and as you see the red bits coming in, they'll follow rivers coming in as well. So there'll be the floodplains and the rivers. Yep.
Fab. Okay, so that's what's happening. It looks pretty scary. But that moves us on to part 2 of activity 1. 1B. Same groups, back to your same boards. Think about how can we mitigate or prevent those impacts? What do you think about the current defences? So what have you learned I don't know what you've learned in class, but how are we doing now? And then what do you think we could do instead? So I'll give you about 5 minutes on this one. So the key ones here are these two, really. I mean, this sort of leads into here. It's, yeah. Yeah. I need my drink, actually. And my drink. Yeah. So that map is if we do nothing. So that big area of red, there are, I think it's only 8 pumping stations. They're just pumping out water all the time. If they were to stop, the sea would come in about 12 miles. So that map is if nothing was done. But there are still areas that things are not going very well.
So where do you live at the moment?
Me?
Yeah.
In Brook.
So you're in Brook. So Brook is kind of outside of that area, but if you think about places like Stoke, for example, or Surlingham, that's it. So it's low-lying, it's marshland. It is kind of floodplain at the moment, but it's fine, it's coping. But if those sea levels were to do that, yeah, disappears.
So I think that means we're missing one soft engineer and we don't know what it is.
What was that professor, the gentleman from University of Essex? He was talking about he was talking about vegetation with it.
How are we getting on?
Good.
Yeah, what have we got so far?
We've got like soft and hard engineering.
Yeah.
And then we did some examples of that. And then
Oh yeah, so then, and then now we answer the 2 other questions.
So if we go to the third one, so assume the current defences are doing okay, but sea levels are expected to rise so much that it's going to just cost a lot of money. So what else could we do instead? What do you think?
Could make the land higher near the coast.
Well, it's not a ridiculous question. It's not a ridiculous suggestion, but how would you do that is the other thing. Have more funding, maybe. Well, a lot of what you see in the countryside has been moved, or pretty much every river has been man sort of adapted and changed. Like, you'd be surprised the scale of landscape changes. It's not necessarily in one go, it's over 50, 100, 200 years.
surely wouldn't it be better to like remove the houses now before they get demolished anyway?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Put it in. Right, last scribbles then, 30 seconds or so, and then a different confident person stay with the flip charts. A different person. Nice one. Okay, last scribbles then, and then somebody different. Stay with the flip chart. I need my AR/VR stuff.
Yes, because then you can do like, yeah.
Right. Down. Come on. Pens down.
They reflect and they absorb. They reflect the sea.
Fab. So we'll start over here first then, please. What have you got down for how you think we can mitigate or prevent climate change impacts?
Well, obviously we can use hard and soft engineering,
So yeah,
drawings, gathering, MP route for hard engineering, and then for soft engineering we could use managing retreat or vegetations.
okay, fab. What was the third one?
Wait, that,
On the left?
MP route.
What's that?
Oh,
Rip wrap.
Rip wrap.
Yeah,
What is that?
rock.
Oh, rock. There we go. Even when you said the correct one, I didn't actually know what that was, so that's fab. I'm learning something at least here. Brilliant. Okay, so how well do you think they're performing?
Well, from what I've heard, soft engineering's doing better from what I've heard today, but I think both are all right. And from what I've learned before, like hard engineering seems quite good, but they're both different. Like soft engineering is more like cost efficient, but that can be more effective sometimes.
Yeah, pretty much nailed on. Okay, and then you've got 1 point on the innovative new ways. What's that there?
Well, right now it's not very well looking at the future using data from the graph.
Mm-hmm.
Remove houses from possible future danger.
So remove houses from future possible danger. Yeah, fab. I'll come on to that in a sec. Let's come over here then. What have you got? What?
Okay, yeah.
Mitigate or preventing?
Well, you can use methods, so hard and soft engineering. So for hard engineering, it would be seawalls, groins, and rock armour, stuff like that. And then for soft engineering, we could do beach nourishment and vegetation.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Yeah, yeah. Straight on then to how do you think we're doing at the moment?
I think that they're doing pretty good, but they could be like more reinforced or like replaced, because with methods, with hard engineering, because if we don't do something more severe, it could get worse.
Yeah, fab. Yeah, we'll come on to, yeah. Okay, brilliant, thank you. Go on then, what have you got?
More hard engineering on coastlines and like more investment in repairs on places where the defences might be outdated or not as effective.
So why do you think we're not doing that already? No? No. It's a really good statement. But why do you think we don't do that everywhere? Potentially, yeah. It's also about well, actually, I'm not going to steal your thunder. So okay, fab. Innovative new ways then. Go on, who wrote it? Renewable resources. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. No, it's brilliant. And you'll hear a phrase hopefully more often called nature-based solutions. So that is looking at those renewable ways and natural ways of protecting the coast. So, I thought we were going to finish at 3. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
We're going to have a very quick
Yes.
explanation of what
So-
we're currently doing.
Due to time, what we're currently doing out on the coast, and we've talked about it quite a lot, is a lot of hard engineering. So there was going to be a video, we're going to skip that. But as you can see, we've got Pakefield, so Pakefield just south of Lowestoft, emergency scheme, rocking by barge, that tends to be what we do. There's a sandscaping scheme, but it's all very much hard engineered solutions. Yes.
Those rock riprap, am I right saying they're about 7 tons each, and about £1,000 per boulder?
Yeah, so it's about 3 to 6 ton maximum. So it can be 6 to 9 or 3 to 6. I think they were up to 9 ton. So yeah, and it's about £85 a ton, £90 a ton. So yeah. So you're not far off from what they cost. And when you look at how many go in there, yeah. And so just to summarise, because we have got a next one, which says what we're going to do. Obviously, these solutions, when you're talking about renewables, carbon, barges are running on fuel, you're getting the rock from other places, basically blowing up places to get rocks out of quarry. You're shipping them, you're placing them, all of that is very carbon heavy. So looking at the innovation and the change is key to moving forward. So not just investment, but looking after what we're trying to protect against. So yeah, raising carbon to try and combat something that's a result of climate change is probably not sustainable going forward. So that's a quick summary of what I was going to say.
So another point about Pakefield there, so you can see rock. So that was because we sadly lost one property and there were further properties at risk, but also a main access road that if that road went, you then wouldn't have been able to get emergency services or bins or anything to the rest of the properties. So it was an emergency placement of rock, but it was within our Resilient Coast project because that rock is not permanent. It's going to be part of what we're calling a rock pipeline. So you can't see it on here, but not far down, you've got something called Benneker Ness, which is this huge, wide beach, basically, and it's actually moving northwards about 80 metres per year. So that's something that's happening naturally. So and hopefully, if it continues at its current rate, in about 15 years, Pakefield, where you've currently got all of this just sheer cliff, will have a lovely wide beach. So that rock won't be needed anymore. So we'll be able to then move that elsewhere.
So is that occurring naturally through longshore drift with no other intervention at all?
Yeah, no intervention, purely naturally. So there's a way that, we do, I say we, it's definitely not me, but the engineering team and the coastal advisors that we have within Coastal Partnership East and with our contractor partners do loads of research and studies and mapping and bathymetric survey. I don't even know what that is, but I hear that a lot.
It's a seabed scan, basically.
All sorts of things, so that we can try and figure out, okay, what's going to happen? The issue with climate change is that everything's happening quicker than we thought.
Yep.
So, because we're short of time, we're going to skip on to the AR/VR stuff. So, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to skip through here as well.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So, Balfour BT have some great AR/VR stuff, and we'll send it around. You can watch the videos.
Yep. You might have to click that a few times.
So, as part of our Resilient Coast project, it's split into all different work packages, which we're calling them something different now, but the word's not coming to me. But we're looking at things like innovative funding mechanisms, so ways that we can get money easier and quicker into communities. We're looking at risk asset mapping, so there's so many assets on the coast and we don't know where they are. It's not all centralised in one place. There's loads, but one of them is all about community engagement and a way that we can engage with people better so that they know what's going on the coast. Within that is the potential for us to create an augmented reality and or virtual reality tool to better engage and educate young people and communities on climate change and the challenges the coast faces. But we're aware that if we just create something, you're not necessarily going to like it. It's not necessarily going to help you learn. So we want your help to design it. I'm going to put both up here because we don't have time to do a part one, part two. But what I want on a fresh new page is for you to think about what digital tools do you use already. So this is stuff that you're on phones, iPads, I don't know what you've got, computers, games that you do at school. Do you actually enjoy them? Do you actually learn anything from them? And then, if I said to you, create a virtual reality game about the coast, what's the first things that come to your head? All right. I thought that was going out. I thought you were ready. I was like, brilliant. What is it? Keep it in your head and write it on there, okay? Back to your things. All right, we've got 2 minutes.
That's gone quite quick.
These are now my ideas. There's no proof.
There is.
All right.
In my brain.
Okay. Because we're not going to have a feedback session because we're short of time and there's going to be another talk. Just on the thing, write number 1 and number 2, and then a tick or a cross. All right? Each one of you put a tick if you did find it interesting, yes or no, basically. Does that make sense? So, just at the bottom, can I just steal that a second?
What? You are silent.
2. So, I just want... Oh, they've binned me off already. Did you enjoy it? Tick or cross? Are you glad you took part? Tick or cross? So, yeah, fantastic. Can I just run that? 1, 2. Right. Did you enjoy it? Be honest, yeah, Fab. Are you glad you took part? Fab. Be honest with me. Did you enjoy this? Fab.
I enjoyed it.
Are you glad you took part? Fab.
Yes, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Fab.
We had a great show.
Fab. Appreciate it, man. So you've got a bit 5 minutes now to go get. You're not allowed coffee, I don't think, but have a orange juice. Coffee, yeah. Fab. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I'll remember that and I'll tell you.